3,000. The number is 3,000. That's how many times my top 10 solo games list has been viewed on YouTube in just about a month, maybe even a little less. 3,000 times. Well, I know what to do about that, and it's called pandering. So, hey everyone, welcome back to Tabletop Toolbox, and I think I'll do another one of these real quick. Another top 10, sure, why not? Because the numbers don't lie. So I put out my video here not too long ago about getting 100 subscribers, and that's been awesome. I'm up to, let's see, literally as of this filming, 162. The numbers are going up very nicely, and I'm just thrilled that you're here. Now, I did put out a vote to see what folks wanted to see next for a top 10, and I basically got, I think, about a 5-way tie. We're going to work on some of those. I'm going to put a little more production value into those for sure, but I'm going to do a quick little, kind of a casual top 10 for you here. This is going to be my top 10 favorite games that I don't own. So these are games that either folks have brought to our house to play, or we've played at their house, or lately with the game nights kind of kicking back up here in the Richmond, Virginia area, I've gotten to play a couple games with strangers or some friends out at game nights, and I'm going to review just a couple of those. So let's go ahead and kick it off. I'm going to make this very short and sweet. I'm going to kind of, get through these sort of quick. There's also not going to be a lot of, panning shots or top downs, because I don't have these games, so any of the images that you see will be borrowed from Board Game Geek or other sources, which I will try to make sure I credit as well as possible. So let's go ahead and get started with number 10. All right, my number 10 is a game that I haven't played in quite a while, and because of that, I was a little fuzzy on just what it was I liked about the game. And so I looked it up on Board Game Geek, and quite to my surprise, this game is number 18 overall. Which is pretty incredible. And it's also kind of ironic that here it is at number 10 on my list. Now that is in no way a way of saying that I think the other 9 games are better. It really is just sort of a reflection as to how long it's been since I've played this game. This is Concordia. Now, I've only played Concordia online through a website called Boîte de Jeu, which I believe is Box of Games. I played it a couple times online with strangers, once online with my wife, which was the only time I ever won the game, quite frankly. What I thought was really neat about Concordia is it's almost like a deck builder. You've got these cards that you're playing, these cards that you take various actions. You're moving around this large, very colorful board. You're trying to establish almost like trade routes or little colonies, little villages, if you will, markets maybe, and you're trying to get different resources. You're sort of trading resources. You're triggering these various regions of the board to produce these resources, and you're using those resources to put down more of the trade routes, to get more cards or whatever it may be. But then at the end of the game, each of these cards correlates to a different aspect of the game, whether it's a number of resources or a number of villages you've put in, and you multiply these together, and that's your score. And at the time when I first experienced this game, maybe 5 years ago, I just thought that was so unique of a method of play. I just never seen anything like that before. So that was really, really neat. But like I said, I haven't played it in a while. I haven't played it ever physically. And so it's a little rusty to me. I wasn't very good at gaming when I experienced Concordia. So I'm going to have to track this one down again, but definitely made a lasting impression with me. And that's why it's at least my number 10, Concordia. All right, number 9 is a bit more recent in my memory. In fact, this game is quite new, having just released a Kickstarter, I believe even this year, 2021, and this is Dwellings of Eldervale. Now, I'm not a huge fantasy gamer. It's just not one of my favorite themes. I mean, I can certainly appreciate them. And so when this game came out on Kickstarter, I just wasn't interested. But a friend brought it over. He ended up actually leaving it with me for a little while, and I got to play it a couple other times. It's something of an abstract game, if you will. You've got these hexagonal tiles that you're building on. As you reveal tiles, some of them may reveal monsters, and everything is sort of color themed. You've got, I think, 7 different colors in the game that all sort of represent different maybe powers or different elements, if you will. And you're sort of exploring across these boards. You're trying to get resources. It's sort of a combination of worker placement, but you're also trying to put down dwellings in some of these areas. You're trying to acquire cards, you're trying to defeat the monsters, all relevant to these colors. And in doing so, everything that you do sort of moves you up these tracks relevant to that color. And at the end of the game, you score the number of aspects of that color you have, whether it's cards or dwellings, multiplied by the value that you've climbed up that chart, which really just means the more things that you have, the more you're going to score. and you multiply those values together, and you can just end up with these wild swings in score if someone has really pushed far up maybe just 2 or 3 of the tracks, while a lot of other players may have just kind of barely touched each track. And so it's, you can really get some variety of scores there. I love colors. I love sort of just rainbow patterns in games, and this game certainly does it. It reminds me of another game called Vindication, which I think maybe delves a little deeper into its mechanisms. But this game was certainly fun. I don't think it's something I'm going to run out and pick up, but I did really enjoy playing it, and I would certainly play it again. My number 9, Dwellings of Eldervale. Number 8 is another game that I haven't played in a while, or at least not in its physical copy. This is one of those few games where the app is just a better way to play the game, even if you can't necessarily play with a lot of other players. This game can be very polarizing because it is just massive in its scope. It's not necessarily very hard. It's just a very, very long game, and it can really kind of be a slog to get through it sometimes. This is Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization. A friend brought this over last year, just before the pandemic really kind of started to lock everybody down. And we started playing, I think it's something like maybe 9 o'clock in the evening. And we finally just threw in the towel at about 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. We still had quite a bit of the Third Age to get through. It was a really, really interesting game. The one thing I think I struggled with was just sort of the luck in what cards come out and what you can kind of do with your civilization. You've got this track of all these cards, and these things can be new technologies, new weapons to use in war, new buildings to produce better resources, new leaders, new forms of government. And it's really neat how they come out and the variety that can be there. They get cheaper as the cards kind of march to the left, and you may just find yourself just not able to grab something at the time that you really need it, and by the time you can afford it, it's gone. And that could be a little frustrating at times, but definitely just a fascinating game, a ton of different mechanisms in play, a unique challenge to kind of sort of build an engine, if you will, in a certain direction and just see how that's going to compare against the civilization that someone else has put together. But like I said, it can be a very, very long game, and that's why the app is quite popular for this game. I would certainly recommend checking that out. If the size and just complexity of this game is sort of a turnoff, check out the app, if you will. This is, again, my number 8, Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization. All right, here we go, my number 7. Now, if you watched my top 10 solo games list, you'll know that I talked an awful lot about space games. This is the first of only a few space games on this list, I promise. But this one really is the big kahuna of space games. This is Twilight Imperium 4th edition. Now, I don't even know where to start here. And the thing is that if you are the kind of person who goes out and watches top 10 game lists, on the internet, you probably know what Twilight Imperium is. You may not have gotten a chance to play it. I'm sure this is a game that sits on an awful lot of people's bucket lists because it's hard to find the right group. It's hard to find the right opportunity to play this game. It is so big and so grandiose, but I was very fortunate to get to play this game literally just a few weeks ago, and I was so excited. I mean, I had a full bag of snacks and things that I brought along to get through that day, and it was a day. It was a little over 9 hours of gaming. 3 of us had never played it before. We were playing against someone who was very experienced with the game. They played 3rd edition and 4th edition. They did win the game, and I had a really good time with it, but I gotta say, it's one of those games that it is almost just too hard to get to the table. It's too hard to get through because it is so well known for being so long and so complex. It's a game that really just scares people off, and there's a little bit of good reason to that. But what's also fascinating about the game is just the story that you get to tell after a full playthrough. I mean, even our experience was probably one that only a few people have ever seen. This is the way that the cards come out, sort of how it works, but and that's really neat. But like I said, it's so difficult to get to play this. And I think, when I play it again, I mean, I probably would, although how often can we carve out, 9-10 hours of our day when we've got a job and a family and all that to be able to play something like this? It's just very, very difficult to do. And I think that's why it just didn't get higher up on my list, because I pretty much know that I can never buy this game. There's no sense in ever owning this game. And for as much as I did find it unique and interesting, I just don't know how often I'll ever really get to play it. I also was a little turned off at there can be a decent amount of luck that comes up in the in the action cards that you get, in the agenda cards that come up. Also, just the factions that you play may interact in ways that you can't really predict and you're not really ready for. Also, I didn't really care for the fact that there's really only one sort of neutral faction. I don't mean neutral in like alliances, but just neutral in the way that it plays. It's not necessarily strong or weak in any one thing, but there's only one of those factions that you can play as, at least that I'm aware of. And so because of that, we all kind of had to accept that we were starting off this game with strengths and weaknesses that we didn't understand in a game that we didn't really understand. And so it just made it very difficult. And I felt like even by the second or third round of the game, I just knew that I wasn't going to win. And it was just sort of waiting to find out who would. So a fascinating game. I certainly respect what it does. I do love a good space game. And this, I mean, it definitely did everything that I expected out of it. I just don't know how often I'll ever get to play it again, or if I ever will play it again. So anyways, that is number 7, Twilight Imperium 4th edition. All right, for number 6, we're going to lighten the mood a little bit. This is a game that I played very, very recently at a game night here in Richmond, and I've always wanted to kind of check it out. This is sort of another one of those themes that have always sort of spoken to my heart. This is On Tour. Now, On Tour is a very, very light, just simple game where you're rolling dice and revealing cards to then write values on a map of either the US, and I think you can also play in Europe. I think that's available in the 2nd edition of this game. And then at the end, after you've filled out all these sort of states or regions on these maps, you then have to draw a simple line connecting as many of the cities as you can from the lowest value to the highest value without ever going down in value. Extremely simple. I mean, literally that's just about the entire game. But it was fascinating just how brain burning and how complex this game was. And you're sitting there and you're looking at the different paths. You're trying to figure out, okay, well, if I put this number there and I don't get the number beneath it that I need, do I still have a way out? Can I still keep this path going? Maybe I'll only get 3 connections instead of 4. And you're really sitting there trying to grok this all out in your head. And I was really surprised at how in-depth the game was. I'm not a huge fan of rolling rights or flipping rights or whatever rights are out there. And so I was glad to kind of play this, on someone else's copy and not have to necessarily run out to buy it. But I might do so because I really did enjoy how this worked. I think it would be fairly easy to introduce to new gamers, maybe not young gamers, and I'm going to talk about that here in just a second. But this is a great game, my number 6, On Tour. All right, for number 5, I'm keeping things lighthearted. This is number 9. No, actually, it is number 9. And yes, who doesn't love being able to make one of those jokes on a top 10 list, right? My number 5 is number 9. Number 9 is this very simple, very straightforward abstract game. I can basically teach you exactly how it works. You've got cardboard tiles, and each one has sort of an LCD digital looking number on it. You've got a deck of cards that represents every number 0 through 9 in it twice. On your turn, you flip over the card, and each player playing takes one of those tiles out of the box and sets it down in front of them. Now, you start off on obviously the ground level, and you can arrange the numbers however you want. You can then start going vertical as you stack numbers with only 2 rules needing to be followed. Number 1, every number on the upper levels has to be fully supported by numbers underneath it. So you can't have any pieces of the number kind of floating over the air. Also, every number that you place on a subsequent level has to touch at least 2 numbers beneath it. So you can't stack a 0 on top of a 0, for example. That's against the rules. But other than that, that's the game. So it's very, very straightforward, very simple to teach. But this can really get brain bending as well as you're trying to sort of visualize where the numbers can go. You're sitting there trying to piece them out. You can't flip them over, which further sort of increases the challenge. But also you can sort of think about what numbers are coming ahead. You know maybe how many times each number has come out. You can start to predict which numbers might be coming up next and sort of making room for them on your board. At the end of the game, you multiply each number by its floor minus 1. So your ground floor, your first floor, is worth 0 points for each number. Your second floor is worth 1 point for each number. So if you've got a 7 on the second floor, that's 7 times 1, 7 points. very, very straightforward. Again, very, very easy to teach. And I feel like this is the game that I could even introduce to my daughter. You know, my 8-year-old would have no problem picking up this game and playing with it. I think on tour might be a little more difficult. That's why I mentioned sort of the age of entry to those games. And I think this is a game also that I might be looking to add to my collection. My number 5, which is NumberNine. All right, number 4, we're going even lighter on the complexity scale, and this is also sort of the last game of a subset of this list, which I'll explain in just a moment. This is number 4, which is Clask. Now, I literally got to play Clask just about a week ago at a small game cafe in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Clask is sort of a melding of crokinole and air hockey on a very small wooden playing surface, and this thing was an absolute blast. Now, first of all, think about air hockey where you're trying to, obviously knock a puck into someone else's goal. You don't really quite have a goal in the back of this board you're trying to defend. Instead, it's a recess in the board, like the center of a crokinole board. And instead of moving your grip or your whatever it's called, your handheld little target in front of you, you're actually working underneath the board using magnets. You have a very small little piece on top. You're knocking a marble back and forth using a magnet underneath the board. Now, what's interesting about that is that at any time, if you pull your piece into your target on your side of the board, you've automatically forfeited that turn. And so you're trying to move back and forth and deflect the marble, but you've got to be really careful about where you put that piece because it can get away from you very quickly. Even more interestingly, there are these little, I call them landmines. There's little magnetic pieces that sit in the middle of the board, and they're cylinders, not squares. That's very important to remember. And these things, if you get at least 2 of them stuck to your piece, again, you've automatically forfeited your point. But the reason that them being cylinders is very interesting is that you can hit them with the marble and then they can flip on their side and roll. So you're sitting there trying to deflect the marble while staying out of your target, while staying away from these sort of magnetic mines, if you will. And it is incredibly just energetic and boisterous and stressful and chaotic. And my wife and I played this, like I said, in Philadelphia, and it was an absolute blast. And it was even more interesting in the fact that our table was ever so slightly skewed towards my side of the board, so everything just kept rolling back to me, and I felt even more just stressed as I tried to deflect all these moving pieces, and I managed to win, so that was pretty cool. I think this game will be going into our collection here at some point. I had a blast playing it. Again, just a game you could instantly set down in front of pretty much anybody of any age group, tell them how to play in about a minute, and you're just off to the races. So an excellent game. My number 4, Clask. All right, with number 3, we're going to come just a little back up the complexity scale, not very far. And as I mentioned, this is the first game of this list that fits in a slightly different category, and that is games that I have purchased. So this game isn't in yet. It was a recent Kickstarter, I think a second or even a third run on Kickstarter. This is Project L. Project L, a lot of folks say, oh, it's like Tetris. And I'm going to stop that real quick because it has pieces that look like Tetris pieces, but it is in no way, shape, or form really related to Tetris. It's got the L's and the T's and the squares and your lines, but that's really where the comparison ends. Project L is an abstract sort of a puzzle building game. You get these little tiles and they have just a pattern notched out of them on a 2-sided board. Just very, very pretty abstract game. And you're taking these pieces and you got to fill them into these puzzles. Now, you have 5 actions that you can take on your turn, and you can take any of them up to 3 times. So you can take a piece, you can upgrade a piece, and there's a very simple little scale on your player board that shows you what pieces can be turned into other pieces. You can take a new puzzle, you can put a single piece onto any puzzle that you currently have, or you can take a master action, and the master action lets you place one piece, or up to one piece, that's important to remember, onto any of the puzzles that you currently have on your board. So it's a game all about efficiency, because if you put too many pieces out onto different puzzles, but you don't fill any of them in, then you're kind of stuck, and you gotta take all your actions to just grab the smallest little 1-by-1 piece and upgrade them into the pieces that you need, and you're going to waste a ton of turns to fill in these puzzles. So you've got to kind of balance, okay, when do I just try to get one puzzle done because that will give you points, and some of them will also give you additional pieces that then you can use on subsequent turns. And so, like I said, it's a balancing act. It's all about efficiency and how you play and how you sort of organize these actions. It is a lot of fun, and it's also it's just a very a bright presentation on the table. The tiles are these just jet black tiles with some white text and white dots on them. The pieces themselves are these bright, colorful acrylic plastic pieces that really just pop off the table. It's one of those games that when you're sitting out there playing, people always stop by and, oh, you know, what is this? What are you playing? This looks really neat. And I agree 100%. And that's why I have ordered Project L, my number 3. My number 2 is going to take us back up the complexity chart a good bit. This is another game that I have backed on Kickstarter on one of its subsequent visits to that platform. This is Vindication. Now, Vindication is from a somewhat small designer that is rapidly growing in popularity, and they definitely kind of have a niche following. It's a company called Orange Nebula. They've got another game called Unsettled, which should be delivering fairly soon to its Kickstarter backers. Their games are very unique in presentation and in the mechanisms. They do a phenomenal job of networking and communicating with their backers. Now, Unsettled didn't really speak to me, and in fact, the first time that I saw and heard of Vindication, it didn't speak to me either. A friend of mine told me about it, she showed it to me, and I thought, I have no interest in this whatsoever. But, you know, I humored her, and we played the game, and it was maybe about 3/4 of the way through that I was like, man, I really like this game. I really love just the mechanisms and how it works. In Vindication, you are a wretched scum that has been cast away from your homeland onto this sort of island of exile, if you will, and it plays around colors, much like the dwellings of Eldervale that I mentioned earlier. You've got 3 primary colors, which, if I recall correctly, are things like knowledge and strength and maybe wisdom or something like that, red, yellow, and blue. And as you sort of start to build up your value, if you will, of those attributes, you then can start to delve into the secondary color systems, orange, purple, and green. And unfortunately, I don't remember what those correlate to, but with each of those attributes, you can go and pick up these cards. These cards may give you enemies that you can fight against, or they may give you followers who will help you out throughout the game. And then you can start to go out and branch out some more. You've got this board with all these just little cubes on it, and you've got your potential and your fortitude and whatever else, and you're using these cubes to increase your ability in these various attributes. It's just a very fascinating system. It's also really neat in how an end-game event can be triggered kind of out of the blue. Anytime that you pass, any player passes a point value, I think it's about every 5 points, they take a token, you flip over a new card, and that card will give you an end-game condition that may already be met. And so the game can very quickly end on you without anyone really knowing that it's coming. Just a really, really fun and interesting game. A lot of folks say this game isn't very thematic, and I really just disagree, because you know, you are kind of starting with nothing, and you're trying to build up you know, this impressive character and almost sort of building an engine and using these different cards and artifacts and followers and such to enhance your abilities. And I just love the way that it works. I cannot wait for this game to come in. My number 2, Vindication. All right, here we go, my number 1. And you know, this is gonna go a little higher up the complexity chart still, and it's gonna revisit one of my favorite themes, which I'm sure at this point is no surprise to you. However, I did talk about sort of the grand opponent to this game, if you will, one of its kind of number 1 competitors. And in the video I'm about to put out for the Dice Tower, I'm going to compare those 2 games to sort of the epic cheesesteak war that takes place in Philadelphia between Pat's and Gino's. And that's because my number 1 game is Eclipse: Second Dawn for the Galaxy. Now, I just mentioned Twilight Imperium a couple games ago. Twilight Imperium, obviously, like I said, it's a huge, grandiose game. There's a lot of debating and almost kind of arguing. And I felt like Eclipse was much more streamlined. It was much more, okay, here's what you're trying to work for. And it just gives you the pieces that you need to pretty much go about it right off the get-go. I enjoyed this game so much that about halfway through our first playthrough, I placed an order for it. And I'm really, really excited to get this game to the table some more and get to just experience it in more depth and in more detail. Now, I agree with the recent video that Shut Up and Sit Down put out. And Quinn's talked about how, you know, Eclipse doesn't necessarily tell a story, especially as well as Twilight Imperium can. And I do agree with that. It is definitely a little more on the surface, if you will, as far as the game goes. But on the same token, I feel like it's a little easier to kind of to sort of be a little secret about what you want to do. You can kind of work to your own angle. You can play the game kind of how you want. You don't have to worry about the game pushing you into different scenarios by putting cards out or agendas out that then you kind of have to just live with. I also really like the way that you can kind of pull back. You can play outside of the game, if you will, a little bit, sort of retreating back to the outer edges of the galaxy and just kind of do whatever you want. A couple things I wasn't crazy about was a little bit of luck in the game. The systems that you explore can just be completely useless, and you can not really mitigate it, but you can sort of skip that action if you want. You just kind of waste the disc, unfortunately, but you can sort of hold back and only put out the systems that you want. Also, I was a little annoyed by the tech coming out. That wasn't always the tech that I needed. Now, I didn't understand early in the game the value of technology and sort of those research actions. I figured it out, but a little too late. And so I definitely didn't score that well in my first game of Eclipse, but I did just have an absolute blast playing it. I love just that Euro feel of it, and the fact that you can win without ever firing a shot. In fact, the guy who won never fired a shot at anyone except for the AI characters who pop up, and he also never researched or never upgraded a single ship. He never put any tech upgrades into a ship except for the ones that he just found throughout exploration, and that's pretty neat. Not a lot of games will give you that opportunity, especially these grand epic space exploration games. They usually kind of force you to get the guns out and do some shooting. So I really enjoyed that system as well. Like I said, a great game, an epic game, and I'm looking forward to some more plays of my number one, Eclipse Second Dawn for the Galaxy. And that's it, the top 10 favorite games that I have played but do not own. I've got some other neat stuff coming out. My wife and I are going to start looking at some of our co-op games. I'm going to put together a review pretty soon for Rush MD, which is just a very crazy and exciting co-op game. Also, I mentioned I'm going to be talking a little bit more of the comparison between Twilight Imperium and Eclipse, at least from my perspective, and a couple other things that I've got on the way. So thank you very much for checking out this video. I will chat with you soon, and cheers. My number 6 on tour. Please be number 6. Was that the right number? Yes. Okay.